Have you ever wondered what the most outrageous scams in history were? From Ponzi schemes to pyramid schemes, scammers have tried a variety of methods to trick their victims and make a quick buck. In this video, we will examine the 10 biggest scams in history. We will examine the techniques used by these scam artists and how they managed to fool so many people. So without further ado, let's begin our exploration of the world's most notorious scams. The Medici Bank Scandal. The Medici Bank was founded by Giovanni di Medici in Florence, Italy in 1397. This bank was one of the most successful in all of Europe at the time and was responsible for financing many of the Renaissance-era projects, including the construction of St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. However, this success didn't last forever. In 1494, the bank collapsed due to a combination of financial mismanagement, fraud, and embezzlement. It had been managed by Giovanni's son, Lorenzo de' Medici, who had borrowed heavily from foreign banks in order to finance his extravagant lifestyle. When Lorenzo died suddenly in 1492, the bank was unable to repay its debts. The scandal involved several prominent bankers in Florence and led to an investigation by the Venetian Senate. The result of the investigation was that several of those bankers were sentenced to prison and had their assets seized. This scandal marked the end of the Medici's financial power and they never regained it again. Despite its downfall, the Medici Bank is remembered as one of the most successful banks in Europe during its time and was a key factor in funding some of the most important projects during the Renaissance period. The Ponzi Scheme. The Ponzi scheme is one of the oldest and most notorious scams ever in history. It involves convincing people to invest in a product or service with the promise of high returns. However, instead of using the money to invest, the perpetrator uses the money to pay earlier investors in order to give the appearance of consistent returns. Charles Ponzi, an Italian businessman, created the scam in 1920. It quickly grew in popularity and was used by many other fraudsters after Ponzi's conviction for mail fraud. The scheme works by promising investors huge returns for their investment, often ranging from 50 to 100%. This return rate is too good to be true and should alert potential investors to the scam. The main flaw with the Ponzi scheme is that it relies on a continuous influx of new investors to keep the scheme running. Eventually, this cycle breaks down when the perpetrator can no longer find enough new investors or when the existing investors start asking for their money back. It's important to remember that if something sounds too good to be true, then it probably is. Investing your money with promises of high returns without any real evidence or research is never a good idea. Always make sure you understand exactly what you are investing in and who you are investing with before handing over your money. The Nigerian Prince Scam, or 419 Scam, is one of the oldest and most famous scams in history. It works by someone posing as a Nigerian prince or other wealthy individual who promises to pay the victim a large sum of money in exchange for their help in transferring funds out of the country. The perpetrator of the scam typically asks for the victim's bank information in order to make the transfer, but instead makes off with the money. The scam was popularized in the late 1990s when emails from purported princes from Nigeria began appearing in inboxes all over the world. In recent years, the scammers have begun using social media and even phone calls to reach victims. The scam has become so pervasive that many people still believe it is a legitimate opportunity to make money, even though the consequences of getting scammed are very real. Victims can be left with empty bank accounts, ruined credit scores, and even identity theft. The only way to protect yourself from this type of scam is to be vigilant and never give out any personal or financial information to someone you don't know. The South Sea Bubble. The South Sea Bubble was a financial scam that occurred in England in 1720. The scheme was promoted by the South Sea Company, which offered investors the chance to buy stock at what seemed like a bargain price. However, the company's stock was overvalued and soon plummeted, causing widespread panic and financial ruin for many investors. The scheme was orchestrated by Britain's government, which had granted the company exclusive rights to trade with Spain's colonies in South America and the Caribbean. The government hoped to use the profits from the company to pay off a large portion of its debt. Unfortunately, the company failed to make any real profits, but it continued to promote its stock to investors, touting the potential for large returns. Investors flocked to buy the stock, causing its value to skyrocket. Many of them borrowed heavily to buy more shares, confident that they would reap huge rewards from their investments. However, when the bubble burst and the stock price plummeted, many investors were left with heavy debts and no way to repay them. The South Sea Bubble is widely considered to be one of the earliest examples of an economic bubble, where asset prices become so inflated that they eventually collapse. The collapse of the bubble caused widespread economic panic in England, leading to a series of regulations that were meant to prevent similar bubbles in the future. The Hungarian Foreign Scam. The Hungarian foreign scam was one of the most massive financial scams of the 21st century. It took place between 2001 and 2002, when a group of international fraudsters conspired to manipulate the prices of Hungarian foreign currency, HUF. The criminals bought huge amounts of the currency at very low prices, and then sold it for huge profits. The scam was orchestrated by a group of prominent businessmen from Russia, Ukraine and other countries in Eastern Europe. They had acquired their money from illegal activities such as drug smuggling and money laundering, and they were eager to find ways to convert it into legitimate funds. To do this, they colluded with a few major banks in Hungary and used them to buy and sell large sums of Hungarian forint, manipulating the prices. The fraudsters profited greatly from their scheme, while the victims were left with losses that totaled nearly $5 billion. The scandal caused a deep economic crisis in Hungary, and it also exposed the vulnerability of the nation's banking system. As a result of this incident, the government tightened regulations on foreign investments and made reforms to improve the integrity of the banking system. In addition, Hungary has taken legal action against some of the perpetrators in order to recover some of the stolen funds. The auction rate securities scandal. The auction rate securities scandal was one of the biggest financial frauds of all time. In this scheme, investors were sold long-term debt instruments that were advertised as short-term investments with a guaranteed return. The bonds were issued by major banks and financial institutions such as Citigroup, Merrill Lynch, Morgan Stanley, UBS, Goldman Sachs and Lehman Brothers. The bonds were auctioned off on a regular basis to set the interest rate and maturity date, with the understanding that the bondholders could redeem their investments at any time. However, the banks and financial institutions behind the bonds began to manipulate the auctions, leading to artificially high interest rates and forcing investors to remain in their positions for extended periods of time. Eventually, the auctions stopped occurring altogether, leaving investors unable to redeem their investments and losing millions of dollars. The scandal led to over 20 separate class action lawsuits against banks and other financial institutions, resulting in billions of dollars in fines and settlements. In addition, dozens of individuals have been charged with criminal activity related to the manipulation of the auctions. Madoff Investment Securities LLC. Madoff Investment Securities LLC was one of the most infamous scams in history, involving the largest Ponzi scheme ever uncovered. Bernie Madoff, the former chairman of Nasdaq, ran a large-scale fraud that cheated thousands of investors out of billions of dollars over a period of almost 2 decades. The scam began in the 1980s when Madoff began to solicit money from investors for his own financial gain, without actually investing it. Instead, he used incoming funds from new investors to pay back previous investors, giving them false returns and creating a web of lies. By 2008, Madoff had accumulated up to $65 billion through this fraudulent operation. When the scam was finally discovered in 2008, it was found that many well-known organizations, such as banks, hedge funds, and charities, were affected. Many of these investors lost their entire life savings, leaving them financially ruined. As a result of this scheme, Madoff was sentenced to 150 years in prison, and ordered to pay $170 billion in restitution to the victims. Although he is currently serving his sentence, many of his victims are still struggling to rebuild their lives after such an immense loss. Stanford Financial Group. The Stanford Financial Group was one of the biggest financial frauds of all time. Led by Robert Allen Stanford, the group ran a Ponzi scheme that involved selling fraudulent certificates of deposits, CDs, to investors around the world. The group claimed to be investing the money in stocks, bonds and real estate, but instead used it to pay for their own expenses and lifestyle. The U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, eventually took action against Stanford Financial Group in 2009. They accused them of perpetrating a $7 billion fraud. Following an investigation, Stanford and other executives were found guilty of defrauding investors and sentenced to long prison sentences. Stanford Financial Group was a particularly damaging scam because it involved more than 20,000 investors from over 100 countries. It has been described as one of the most widespread Ponzi schemes of all time, resulting in thousands of people losing their life savings. Lehman Brothers. Lehman Brothers was an American investment bank that filed for bankruptcy in 2008, making it one of the largest bankruptcies in U.S. history. At the time of its collapse, Lehman Brothers was the 4th largest investment bank in the United States. The firm's downfall was attributed to a variety of factors, including high-risk investments and overly aggressive debt accumulation. In 2007, Lehman Brothers began increasing its risk exposure by buying subprime mortgage-backed securities. In 2008, the financial crisis hit and the price of the securities dropped drastically, leaving Lehman Brothers with losses of more than $6 billion. When Lehman Brothers declared bankruptcy in September 2008, it had liabilities of more than $600 billion. The collapse of Lehman Brothers had a major impact on global markets and led to a cascade of other failures in the banking industry. It also triggered a wave of foreclosures and the erosion of consumer confidence. To this day, Lehman Brothers remains a case study for the dangers of excessive risk-taking. Enron is one of the most notorious corporate scandals in history. Enron was an American energy company that declared bankruptcy in 2001 after overstating its income for years and hiding billions of dollars in debt. The scandal was a result of mismanagement, fraudulent accounting practices, and inadequate financial disclosure. The company's accounting practices allowed it to overstate its income and assets while understating its liabilities and losses. By 2000, Enron had become the largest natural gas merchant in the world, but its stock plummeted by 85% by the end of 2001 due to revelations of its fraudulent activities. The scandal caused investors to lose billions of dollars and thousands of people to lose their jobs. Several high-ranking executives were convicted of fraud and sentenced to prison. The scandal also damaged the reputation of the accounting firm Arthur Andersen, which had been responsible for auditing Enron's books. Enron's scandal highlighted the need for improved corporate governance, transparency, and oversight in order to protect investors and ensure that companies are held accountable for their actions. It also showed that even large and seemingly successful companies can fail if proper checks and balances are not in place. To get other undiscovered secrets, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and like the video and share it with your friends. Thank you.